Okay, let's go.
The Modern Eunuch, the structural mechanics of the great gender divide. Every week, a new piece of data emerges detailing the widening chasm between young men and women. We read about plummeting marriage rates, the male loneliness epidemic, and the rise of movements where men simply opt out of the relationship market altogether. Mainstream commentary usually blames these trends on superficial culprits: dating apps, screen addiction, or vague political polarization. But if you strip away the cultural noise and look at the raw mechanics of the system, a much deeper, more historical structural breakdown is occurring. Without realizing it, modern society has engineered a social contract that mimics one of the ancient world's most transactional institutions, the eunuch. We are witnessing the rise of the modern eunuch, a paradigm that demands the labor, protection, and liability of the traditional male role, while systematically stripping away the tools, authority, and status required to sustain it. The historic mechanism of the castrated servant. To understand the modern parallel, we have to look past the physical brutality of historical castration and look at its political function. In ancient empires, from Rome to the Forbidden City, eunuchs were not created out of cruelty. They were created out of a need for a specific type of labor. A ruler needed administrators, generals, and guardians who were highly capable, physically strong enough to do heavy lifting, and fiercely loyal. However, the ruler also needed to ensure these men could never pose a threat to the throne or establish their own family dynasties. Castration was the ultimate tool to achieve this. It allowed the state to extract maximum utility, protection, and labor from a man, while rendering him politically and biologically neutralized. He was structured to be pure utility for the empire, bearing immense systemic responsibility and physical liability, while possessing zero capacity to accumulate personal leverage or build an independent legacy. When we look at the extreme edges of modern cultural theory and the current state of the relationship market, the ideal role engineered for the modern man looks strikingly similar. The demand is for a behavioral version of the historical eunuch, a compliant, neutralized provider who absorbs all the traditional risks and obligations of head of household labor, but possesses none of the traditional executive authority or cultural respect.
Stripping the tools to do the job. Compounding this structural failure is the fact that the actual economic tools required to fulfill the provider role have been largely dismantled. The baseline of the traditional model relied on a healthy working-class economy, where a single income could purchase a home, support a family, and secure a stable future. In the modern economic landscape, stagnant wages relative to the skyrocketing costs of housing and living mean that the single-income household is virtually a statistical impossibility for the vast majority of men. Furthermore, the traits historically associated with building that foundation, stoicism, assertiveness, competitive drive, and the distinct execution of male authority, are frequently pathologized in modern educational and corporate environments. The contradiction is glaring. Men are told that the traits required to acquire resources are toxic, yet they enter the relationship market only to find that the instinctual female preference for status, resource capacity, and strength remains completely intact. The culture insists men should no longer hold the tools of status and leverage, but still punishes them if they lack the fruits of those tools. The ultimate solution: stepping off the grid. When a system demands an output while systematically confiscating the inputs, the system eventually breaks. You cannot force an entity to operate at a permanent deficit, faced with a game characterized by completely asymmetrical risk, where the legal and financial code penalizes the provider in the event of systemic failure, while offering no structural protections for his investment. A massive, quiet revolution is taking place. Men aren't failing to launch. They are executing a cold, logical cost-benefit analysis. The rise of men going their own way, the refusal to participate in the traditional marriage market, and the shift toward absolute minimalism and self-reliance are not signs of modern laziness. They are the only logical response left on the board. If you strip away the tools to do the job, the only rational move is to refuse the role entirely. The great gender divide will not be solved by dating apps or surface-level cultural commentary. It will only be resolved when society recognizes that you cannot treat an entire population as a specialized utility force. extracting their labor and protection while neutralizing their agency, and expect them to keep showing up to build the world. Until the structural math makes sense again, until responsibility is once more balanced with authority, and risk is matched with reward, the modern eunuch will continue to do the one thing his historical counterparts never could: walk away from the palace gates entirely.
Join the discussion, rebalancing the equation. We are living through the largest structural recalibration of human relationships in modern history. The old contract is dead, and the current attempt to extract traditional masculine output without offering a viable input is mathematically unsustainable. If we want to fix the great gender divide, we have to stop arguing about surface-level symptoms and start talking about the foundational math. We have to look at the balance of risk, reward, authority, and liability, which brings us to a simple, fundamental law of human systems. You cannot decouple authority from responsibility. If the modern landscape insists on absolute autonomy, zero traditional male authority, and symmetrical independence, then the old-school expectations must be completely discarded across the board. You cannot demand a 21st-century independent partner in the courtroom, but expect a 1950s traditional provider at the restaurant. So let's open up the floor. If you claim the absolute authority, you inherit the absolute responsibility. And if that's the case, it's your turn to provide. Pay for the damn dinner date.